When you create the virtual machine, I want you to create it with the name Debian. And I want you to put it in the same virtual machine folder, the temporary folder, where your other Ubuntu virtual machine was listed. And as soon as you type Debian, it's going to change this. It should change this to both Linux and to Debian. So as you type in Debian, it's going to change from Windows to Debian 64. Any questions?
No, sir.
First, the next screen that pops up, it says, what do you want to do for memory? As long as you have 4 gigs of RAM on your laptop or more, I want you to increase the memory shown to 2048. So all you're doing is seeing the screen and making sure that your screen matches. When your screen first comes up, it'll show 1024. But I want you to match your screen with the one that's shown. So the next thing that comes up is the RAM allocation. Hard disk, it's going to ask you, do you want to create a virtual hard disk now? Accept it, accept the 8 gig, right? And accept that it's a VDI type, and accept that it's dynamically allocated. But then when this comes up, it'll show 8, and I want you to change it to 16. And there's a reason for that. I want you to double the size of the dynamically allocated disk. So you can have larger dynamically allocated disks, and they don't use all that space until they need them. And I want you to see how that works. So I want you to change 8 to 16, and then hit create. And then basically on your display, I want you to slide this over so it reads 128 megs, right? So that matches. Check the box for enable 3D acceleration. Any questions so far?
No, sir.
Here's the last step. You have to change storage, the controller that's empty. You have to click this disk icon, and then it asks you to select from a file. And when you pick, you're going to pick Debian right here, your ISO, after it's been verified with a hash. After this is done and you click open and OK, now you can start the machine. And when you start the machine, the graphical install will show up. Now the graphical install will walk you through a set of steps. And in your assignment, it says you're going to accept the default you know, what it suggests, but then when you get to the hard disk partition, you have to select something manually. I'm going to show you that in just a minute. So I have Debian VDI. After I'm done, I can go into my temp folder into the virtual machine. And what you should see is a virtual disk image that's only 4 gigs and change large. It is not 16 gigs large. And that's ideal because when you're first setting up a virtual machine, if it's only using the host disk space that it needs, if you take snapshots, it's going to be very kind. Are there any questions to what I've showed you so far?
No.
Okay. Now your whole ability to complete the solution, which is worth 5 points, is to finish this process. So what I'd like to do is run through it real quick one more time so you can see the Debian part that has to be set up. I'm going to cut this off. I'm going to remove it. I'm going to delete all the files. Okay. Any questions?
Like, do we have to delete the virtual machines that are already on VirtualBox?
No, you don't if you have lots of hard disk space on your host.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I explained in the assignment as well. So for your assignment 3.1, you do not have to, but I'm going to because I don't have very much.
Okay.
So I'm going to type Debian, and the moment I type Debian, this changed to Linux and it said Debian. Oh, it says I cannot create the machine folder Debian in the parent folder because it already exists. Okay. So I'm going to say OK, and I'm going to cancel that. And I'm going to fix that right now because I want this to work just like what I had before. So I'm going to delete this. And so now I only have the one virtual machine running on my machine. So now I have more hard disk space now. If I look at this PC, I got 56.5 gigs. I've got more gigs now. So I'm going to go ahead and create new. I'm going to type in Debian. It changes to type Linux and Debian. I hit next. I'm going to change this to 2048. Just as we told you, I'm going to hit next. I'm going to create a virtual hard disk. It's going to be the VDI image format. It's going to be dynamic. I'm going to change 8 to 16. Everybody with me so far?
Yeah.
Yep.
I'm going to go into settings. Before I start it, under display, I'm going to change this to 128 and check that. I'm going to go into storage, click the empty, click on this, choose a disk file, go to my downloads folder and select my Debian. I'm going to hit OK. And now I'm going to start my machine. There's going to be a couple of places in the setup here that I want you to see this, right? So I'm going to say select this. I'm going to click on this and say capture, and I'm going to hit enter. So Debian comes up. I'm going to accept English. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
Do I want to do United States or do I want to choose like other for Virgin Islands?
Let's see, other.
Let's try other. So here's Caribbean. I'm going to choose Caribbean. And now I've got all of the Caribbean islands. I'm going to say US Virgin. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
Okay. Going to accept United States. Going to accept key map to be American English. It's not British English. So it's loading the installer components from the CD, but because I'm connected to the internet and it's a CD, it's going to ask me if I want to load additional components from the internet or update additional components from the internet. And I'm going to answer yes. This won't take very long to complete. So it's detecting network hardware. It's going to do the NAT, which is nice. And once it has NAT network connectivity, it's going to go out. I'm going to leave the host name the same, Debian. Okay. I'm going to skip the domain name. I don't need a domain name. It's going to ask me to put in a root password. You need to make sure that you get it right and that you store the value somewhere so that you don't forget it. Because if you forget this, it won't work. Your machine won't work. You won't be able to log in and make changes. So I'm going to go ahead and continue. I'm going to create a new user with my first initial and last name. I want you to do the same. It's going to says it's a reasonable choice. The username should start with a lowercase letter followed by any combination. I'm going to say continue. It's asking for a password for my user account. I'm going to put in another different password. because I don't want them to be the same. But if you cheated, who would know? All right, so it's setting up the user. Now it's setting up the clock based on the Caribbean time that we gave it. It's inserting all the disks, and then it's going to get to this section that talks about the disk partition. And I want to show you what you have to do to finish this assignment, right? Does everybody see this?
Yeah.
The default says guided, use the entire disk. That's what I want to do. I don't want to use the other ones. So every time I have a choice to accept the default, like SCSI 3, whatever, blah, 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 virtual hard disk, I'm going to say continue. And here it says all files in one partition. Every time there's a default that's already selected, I'm just going to continue. And it says finish partitioning and write the changes to the disk. I'm going to hit continue. And here's the part that I have to, here's the part where I have to select something different. It says, if you continue, the changes listed will be written to the disks. Otherwise, you will be able to make other changes manually. The following partitions are going to be formatted. It's talking about the virtual hard disk, the 16 gig one. It says, write the changes to the disks. I'm going to say yes. When I click continue, it's going to start doing a partitioning operation. And then a second screen is going to come up where I have to select the only thing that's listed. And if I don't intentionally change it, like changing no from yes, then I get stuck. I don't want you to get stuck. If this happens fast enough, I'll show you what it is you're going to do for the third section of your solution. It's actually something very quick and easy. I'll ask you to change and set up some software, but take a snapshot first, and then load the software, and then take another snapshot, and then go back in and revert back to the first snapshot, which would remove the application completely, and it would be like starting over from the time before you did the install. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want you to see how a snapshot works. When you delete a snapshot, it's going to fold the changes in that snapshot into the virtual machine so that you can no longer roll back to that point. So the one thing that you want to remember about snapshots is that if you delete them, it's going to ask you if you want to fold the changes into your virtual machine, and if you say yes, it means that it's going to take whatever happened at that time of the snapshot and change your virtual machine to match it, and then it's going to be gone. So you have to be sure whenever you're deleting snapshots that you know what you're doing. Like for example, in the example I just gave you, if you install an application and then you discover, oh my gosh, I installed the wrong application, I don't want this, I know I don't want this. You could keep the first snapshot, delete the second snapshot, and the second snapshot will basically be gone, and then you can roll back to the first snapshot where the virtual machine returns to the system state where it did not have the application loaded. Now, the thing that I found a little frustrating is that this goes on for quite a while, and then it asked about booting from a particular partition, and so I thought this thing was going to run and be finished, and then this second screen came up where you had to select something and then continue, or it wasn't going to go. Shouldn't be too much longer. Although this is running a little slower than when I did it last time, simply because I'm sharing the screens live with you. And that's taking up some of the bandwidth that this is using to install. So a word to the wise when you do it on your own. It might be good if you don't have other streaming music or streaming movies going on your system while you're doing it. Okay?
Yes, sir.
I mean, unless you got plenty of time and you don't care. There we go. So it's asking if we want to use a network mirror. The default says yes. I'm going to say continue. It says enter the information manually. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to pick the mirror from the United States because I don't see a mirror that's in the Caribbean. Does anybody see a listing that shows Caribbean? Not really.
Not that I see.
Yeah. So I'll take back what I said. This is a third thing that you have to do. So I go to the United States and then I click this one to continue. There is no proxy. I'm just going to click connect. And now it's retrieving some information from that mirror to see if there are updates. It's checking if software needs to be updated. That's all it's doing. So it's doing your first system update for you, which is really kind of cool. And that's very efficient. And it's doing that over the internet. So technically speaking, that would be the second change that you make where you explicitly scroll down and select United States, and then you accept the other defaults. And then it's talking about the package manager. So what that has to do with, after it's all finished, it's going to ask you what partition you want to start your virtual machine from, what your boot partition is, and you have to physically select the one option on the screen. Wouldn't it be crazy if, since I did it last week, they updated this thing so that step isn't even in there anymore? It'd be nice. There may have been an image update, and if there was an image update, this might take a while to run. Is there anyone that has to leave, or can we stick around a couple more minutes?
No, I have time.
Victor, how about you?
I'm good.
Robert, Aaron, are you good?
Yeah, we good. I good.
Okay. Yeah, I did this just a couple of days ago, so, oh, yeah, all right, so here we go. So configuring the popularity contest, I'm going to accept that. That has to do with providing feedback to the Debian folks about which applications you install. I'm not worried about that. There'll be another screen where it shows you the different options. You're going to leave these the way they are, but you could uncheck print server. That's a third change manually we could make. And then there'll be one last screen. So it's going to run, and then there's this final screen about which partition do you want to start your system with. And that's moving along pretty quickly. I'm at, you know, 200 out of 1,153 files. 43 seconds remaining. So I had a 16 gigabyte hard drive, and this is creating a dynamically allocated hard disk to run this virtual machine on. It's only going to use what it needs. If I look now in my temp folder under virtual machines and I look at the Debian folder, right now it shows I just have 1.6 gigs, 1.5 gigs. It's only used 1.5 gigs to this point and not 16. It's kind of nice. I'm going to come out of that folder so I can refresh it in a minute. Oh. Yep, my internet service is flopping around, so now it's saying it's a little longer. If it's completely quiet, then it seems to run faster. So I'm just going to stay quiet. And there we go. So it's retrieved all the files that it wanted to download. It's running an automatic update. That's really nice. I find Debian is a very efficient Linux distribution if you want free software and you want a free operating system. You can include, in one of the options it said KCFC. That's a graphical interface that's very lean, it's very no nonsense, very basic. But there's one that's further down the list called Cinnamon that's a lot like Windows. And that's a very nice graphical user interface on the desktop of the virtual system. And that's very helpful. So you're going to walk through the same process for your own submission. This is worth, I think it's worth 2 points. Let me look while we're waiting. When you're finished, the last thing you're going to do is open up your virtual machine folder and look at the debian.vdi and get a screenshot. And you're going to capture that screenshot and submit that for your assignment with your name and the assignment number. So you see here, I named the screenshot 3.1 assignment kentop.png. So that's what you upload to submit for this. And you want to do it as soon as possible because when I post the solution by tomorrow morning, you're going to want as much time on the solution as you can. So the snapshot feature is very nice when you know how to use it. You just have to be careful with the disk space. That's the one thing you always have to watch. That's the one thing that's a constant. Does anyone in our group have experience working with Linux previously?
Just a little bit.
I used, yeah, just a little bit here and there.
Wow. Do you know which styles or flavors of Linux you used?
Yeah, I used Ubuntu.
Mint,
Lint?
Mint.
Oh, Mint.
Linux.
Yeah, Mint. Mint is very popular because it has that cinnamon, it has the cinnamon graphical interface. So I think Mint uses cinnamon, and that's why it's considered to be so cool, right? So they called it Mint because it's cool. And has anyone ever messed with Kali?
Yes.
So Kali Linux, Ubuntu, Mint, they all started off as Debian. And then people changed the desktop and they changed the layout and they changed the loaded applications. And then they created their own distribution of Linux. But each of those flavors that I told you just now, they're all Debian variants. And if you start out with something that's just plain Debian, it's no frills, it's small, but it's very efficient and it's very stable. There are some, when Debian was being developed, if you look back into the history of Debian development, does anybody here have any experience with Mac OS?
I'm actually getting a Mac computer hopefully this week.
Oh,
Laptop.
okay. Well, the Mac OS is a flavor of Unix and Linux, and it has roots or origins that stem or flow back to Debian. So if you look at the team of people who developed Unix and then developed Linux and the Debian variant, and then the people who developed the OS X, the Mac operating system, they borrowed a lot of things from Linux and from Unix, and some of the best things they did come from this Debian working group. Debian is a group of people that work on Debian are the ones that started Silicon Valley. There's a branch of the University of California called UC Berkeley, and it's considered one of the best institutions on the planet for technology. It's like MIT, you know, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or like Caltech, you know, and Stanford. So Stanford University is right around the corner. They have some very competent technical people in Stanford. So yeah, the crew that did Debian were the folks that helped launch the Silicon Valley 30 years ago to start all of the companies and technology that we know and use today. And for something that's free, it's actually very, very reliable and secure and stable. So, and yeah, I don't remember it taking quite so long, but it's almost done. So,
Did you hear about Apple's new chips for their MacBooks?
well, yeah, let's take a look at that while we're waiting. And it's for the Macs?
Yeah, the 2020 MacBook Pros.
So it's using an ARM processor. That's a RISC processor.
Yeah, apparently they moved away from Intel. They have their own processors now.
Yeah, they did that before, and it didn't end it didn't end very well. I mean, now they have on the tablets, right, on their iPads and their iPhones, they have another ARM processor. It's called the A, you know, they have A8, A9, A10. They have all these A series chips, but these are reduced instruction set chips. And I wonder who actually produces them. You think you think Apple actually creates them, or somebody else does that?
I'm not sure.
So they say it's coming out on the. So I have this thing I call the bleeding edge. This is the first time this new chip is coming out. It's coming out on the 17th, and a lot of people like being on the cutting edge, but when it's the first version of a chip that's coming out for the very first time, I call that the bleeding edge, because the bleeding edge, yeah, I don't want to do that. The bleeding edge can be, you know, you're going to be one of a few million people who are trying this on for size for the very first time commercially. And it's often a good idea to wait until the next generation of a chip comes out, or the next generation of a software comes out. So anytime there's a software version that's 1.0, I always cringe, because I think, okay, that's the very first version that they're running with commercially. And wow, a lot of hard lessons are learned with version 1 in software, and in the first release of a um, hardware component. So usually hardware components are tested pretty rigorously, but there's a lot of pressure to get the new stuff out to market, because I think that's going to help them save a lot of money. It doesn't necessarily mean the Macs would be any cheaper. Do you know which model you're planning to try to purchase?
I got the late 2019 MacBook 16-inch.
The 2019?
Yeah, 16-inch MacBook.
Okay, so that'll have the Intel still.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a MacBook Pro?
Yeah.
Oh,
But apparently the like if you spec out the new MacBook Pro 2020 and it costs $3,000, mine still outperforms that.
oh yeah, yeah. One thing that I really like about Apple products is that they spend a lot of time fine-tuning the drivers, the hardware drivers for the components on the Intel chipset. So, okay, here we go. So now our screen should be one more. I did discover a hiccup after this installation happened when I rebooted the system afterwards. All right, so here's the grub bootloader. This is the thing I was talking about. It's going to ask you to uninstall. So here it says, hey, this new installation is the only operating system on this computer, on this virtual machine. Do you want to install the grub bootloader to the master boot record? And you want to accept the default, and you say yes. But here you have to select the only option. It says enter device manually. I don't know what the name of that device is, but this is the only one underneath that that's presented. This is the last step you need to do. When you finish doing this, when it finishes loading, it's going to tell you to remove the ISO disk from the CD tray and then reboot the system. And when I rebooted the system, the screen went black and it never came up. And I had to do a machine reset where it was like, okay, I'm going to repower this. So it says installation's complete. Make sure to remove the installation media so that you boot into the new system rather than restarting the installation. So if I go into here, I can say, okay, I'm going to go into settings. I'm going to go into storage. And that's supposed to be empty, and it says empty, so maybe it ejected it itself. I'm going to go ahead and hit continue, and yeah, I got a black screen. It didn't do anything, and then I had to hit the reset. So I'm going to press enter, and this may happen to you. I don't know if it does or not. Your machine is different than my machine, the host machine. But it sat at this screen blinking forever and ever and never really went on, and never booted. But this time it's doing differently. So oh yeah. Yeah, it says the start job is running to load app armor profiles, 17 seconds, 18 seconds, no limit. And it seemed like that never really, so this is where it kind of got hung up. If this happens to you and it doesn't go on, remember we said that virtual machines are not Coke machines, right? Oh, this came up just fine.
Yeah.
So if that happens to you when you build your machine, if it stays black and you wait 5 minutes because it's not a Coke machine, then you go up to machine and hit reset, and it'll say, hey, wait a minute, are you sure you want to do this? It's like, yeah, it's like hitting the power button. I'm going to go ahead and here. So in just a minute, I'm going to have a desktop. I'm going to take, I'll use the default configuration. All right. At this point, I'm going to take a snapshot. But first, what I'd like to do is look at this folder again. So if I refresh this now it's 4.75 gigabytes. This would be the screenshot that I need to load up for my submission. So it shows the Debian folder, and it shows about 4.75 gigabytes. Everybody should get about that same value, okay? And the fun part is if I go in here, I don't have a snapshot folder. So I'm going to go ahead in here, and I'm going to take a snapshot, and I'll call it first underscore before installs, right? So this is the first snapshot before I do application installs. I'm going to say okay, and it's going to take a snapshot of that machine, and I can look now. I wanted you to get the previous screenshot, and the reason I wanted you to get the previous screenshot is because once you take a snapshot, it's going to increase. So does everybody see how I had a 4.75 gigs after the installation?
Yeah.
And now I have a 5 gig, so I lost 250 megabytes. So now the size of that folder, if I open it up, this is still 4.75 gigabytes, but now I have a snapshot folder that can get very large. And right now the snapshots are 284 megabytes. So you can take a screenshot of this as long as you show the actual size of the virtual hard disk. And I don't care if you've already taken a snapshot, but in your solution, the first thing you're going to do is take the first snapshot. So as long as you show it's not 16 gigs, is it? It's nowhere near 16 gigs. So a dynamic allocation hard disk is great, and it's great when you want to roll back changes, and it's great when you're testing or piloting things. But as you start to do more, if you're doing a fixed disk when you take a snapshot, if anything changes on the entire fixed disk, it's going to take a snapshot of the entire fixed disk. So it's going to be another 16 gigs, another 16 gigs, another 16 gigs. If you have dynamic allocation, it's not going to be that crazy, right? Now, there's a performance hit. Your virtual machine is not going to run as fast with a dynamic allocation, and disk defragmentation and optimizing your personal technology is huge. If you don't take the time to defragment and disk clean on your physical host, your virtual machine is going to get slower and slower and slower because of the way that the dynamic allocation works. You have I have 50 gigabytes free basically. And as I start taking snapshots, and it takes a couple of gigs more and a couple of gigs more, it's storing those chunks of snapshot on different sections of the hard disk. So when I run my virtual machine, it has to stitch all that together again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so that's all I intended to demonstrate today for class. I just wanted to walk through some more on the network side with the interfaces to explain a little more about the different options. Just remember, for your assessment for the last module, I'm gonna ask you, okay, which one's the most secure? I'll have a scenario where you say you wanna do the one that's the most secure, and one of the choices will be bridged. And this is the most insecure, right? So I just want you to be keyed into those differences. Remember that only a couple of these,
Yeah.
NAT doesn't let you see any other virtual machines, but you can see other clients on the same network. You can see the host, you can get on the internet, you can do all that. So anyway, so here we talk about dynamic allocation. It's only used if it's necessary. It uses the unique challenges, the disk optimization. So when you're talking about using dynamic allocation, I want you to understand the benefit and the challenge, right? You have to keep a close eye on the disk space whenever snapshots are taken. And you can delete those previous snapshots. That's it. That's all we had to cover. Snapshot can be converted to a clone. This would be the last thought. If you have a state that you love, and you know the snapshot was stable and clean and working, and all the other snapshots you took were horrible, you can clone that snapshot and then create like a master virtual machine that you use from that point forward. So that's one advantage. It's another benefit of having a snapshot is that if you have a good state for your system, you can convert it to a clone. When you convert it to a clone, you get rid of all the other snapshots, you get rid of the defragmentation, the performance improves. So if you realize, okay, this is where I want to be, then you can just clone it, which I think is really cool. Any questions before we close today?
Yeah. So, like, did you already upload the assignment to Blackboard?
I did. It's on.
Okay, because is it under Mod 3 Custom Solutions?
It's under Module 3 Custom Solutions, yes.
Yeah. Okay, but I don't see it on my Blackboard.
Okay. All right, hold on. Can you share your screen? I'm going to stop sharing and stop recording. Does anybody else have the same issue?